Today about teens and stress. Dr. John Duffy wrote this book. It's called The Available Parent. He's also a life coach, clinical psychologist, and parent himself. I also asked today's TMJ4 anchor Susan Kim to join us. She's a mom to 3 kids. So with Tiffany out, I have to call in the heavy hitters.
All right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Good morning, you guys. I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Susan, just for reference, your oldest is 12, right?
Right, so we're just approaching the teenage years, and I'm already seeing signs of it.
Are you?
Yes.
Yeah. So you've got 2 girls and a boy, so 12,
10, and 9.
9. Okay. Yeah. Why are teens so? There they are too. I love that New Year's picture. That's adorable, Susan. Aren't they cute?
Cute kids.
Yeah.
Yes.
John, why are kids so stressed today?
Things have changed so much in just one generation. If we think back to when we were kids, we were stressed, but nothing like what our kids are going through now. And Susan, sounds like you're just starting to see this in your kids. Molly, I know you see this in your kids, and I see it in mine, where they have higher academic standards. They have to keep up socially and on social media that moves a mile a minute. They have all these extracurriculars, and kind of looming in the background is, I got to get into a really good school. It'll be embarrassing if I don't. And so, you know, we're already thinking college. Sometimes at your oldest age, we're thinking like, okay, how am I going to get into Yale?
A good school.
Yeah, at
I'm
this
glad
clip.
you brought that
Yale.
up, because I said Yale, right? And Harvard.
We're shooting for stars here.
Yeah, I said to my 14-year-old last night, I said, we're talking to a psychologist about stress. Do you feel stressed? And she was like, yeah, I mean, I'm aware of it.
Right.
And I said, what stresses you out? What should we ask him? She's like, well, like about college and what my career should be and managing high. And I'm like, she's thinking so far beyond what I did as a 14-year-old.
Right.
And you know, you also brought up social media, which I think is fascinating. There's something like, most teenagers send something like 3,000 something texts a month. And that doesn't probably include Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that. But there's a lot of pressure when their phone goes off to answer it. My mom always talks about you hear your text go off and you think, oh, I got to answer it right away. But it's true. There's a lot of pressure there.
There is. And it changes the pace at which kids live life. You can feel it. When I sit across from a teenager, they're moving at warp speed. To get them to slow down for that hour, to think, okay, I can leave that phone face down on the couch and not look at it for the whole hour, unthinkable.
Well,
I need to be on top of it.
Well, and I think, too, that kids get on social media before they're actually ready. Like, I found out my 10-year-old had been signed up at 9, and I thought, what are you doing? You know, and this is the reason why you're not ready. You know, I don't want you to see pictures of your friends at parties and think, have that make you feel bad, because they're not old enough to really understand that that's okay. You're not going to be at every party. You're not going to be at every event, and not to feel bad. And so I just said, honey, you're not ready to do this, and I took that away from her. But my 12-year-old is on, and every time she says, oh, so-and-so's had a sleepover with so-and-so. And my reaction is, that's great, honey. Did they have a good time? Because you don't want them to think that they've somehow been deprived. But that is something else when you talk about the stress, like having to understand, like those stresses, you don't want them to affect your child. And that just adds to everything else you're talking about.
It really does. And it's something we never experienced. So we're unfamiliar with that feeling of being left out, but being able to actually see pictures of what it was like to be there, you know, and our kids all experience that.
Well, and I think another thing
stress.
that you were talking about was the extracurriculars. You mentioned how much that can add to stress, and I don't know if it's because everybody's in so much or has their kids in so much, or our kids are just so much more talented than we were. I say they do so much better in sports, but it's just when you have that much going on, and then to think you have homework, that's where I see the stress in my kids. It's like, oh my, you know, they get home at 9 o'clock and they still have homework to do for the day.
Yeah, in high school, tons of homework.
Tons of homework, and this expectation that they be very, very involved too. So the idea of sustaining balance, of self-regulation, is almost unthinkable because there's so much pressure to do now. And it's supported to some extent by a lot of school districts, definitely supported by a lot of parents, especially the parents of that top 5% achieving kids, you know, and so it gets the rest of us thinking, oh my gosh, we're all falling behind. I've got to, you know, despite the anxiety my child is feeling, I've got to get them up to par and up to speed, otherwise they're going to be left in the dust.
How did you handle it with your 18-year-old going through those high school years?
I'll be honest, I followed his cues. I realized as much work as I've done with teenagers, I'm no expert. You know, you learn as you go, and I followed his cues, and I noticed he regulates pretty well. You know, so he knows how much homework he needs to do and when to stop. And most of our kids do. If we let them kind of drive the boat and we follow their lead, they tend to know what they're doing. So I follow his lead as much as I can, even in the college application process, where it's tricky to do that because you think, why aren't we applying to, you know, Michigan or Harvard? It says something really high brow. And he's like, no, I'm very happy where I am. It's all good. Okay. And, you know, like, if you can breathe and relax and take your ego and judgment out of it, usually that works out pretty well.
That's been tricky for me just now with high school. It was interesting because when I told you what I wanted to talk about today, you said I wouldn't even have a practice if kids weren't so stressed out. I mean, this is a huge thing for you. And there was this study that said 40% of parents say high schoolers are experiencing a lot of stress, what they identified as a lot of stress from school.
Right. And
in most cases, the stress is from academics, not social issues like bullying and things like that. And the leading cause of stress, 24% of parents say it's homework and advanced classes and things like that.
Right.
But this homework thing, my daughter had a one rehearsal from after school till 6 p.m. and then from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. another rehearsal. So she started homework once she got home after 9 p.m. high school homework.
Yeah.
That stresses me out.
Oh, it's horribly stressful. I work with kids who work till 2 in the morning, don't get nearly enough sleep because they are under that gun and forever constantly stressed. And you can think about how our bodies don't respond very well to that.
Yeah, what happens to kids physically or emotionally, mentally with all the stress?
It's really disastrous. You know, the immune system is compromised, and I often get called in because anxiety and depression tend to set in pretty frequently too, where kids just don't know where to put the emotion affiliated with all of this stress. And there are symptoms.
I was just going to ask you then, as parents, should we be saying no to things for our kids? Because it's hard when, you know, your daughter is so talented and enjoys what she does and wants to do something and it goes till 9 o'clock. But as a parent, do we at some point have to step in and say, okay, let's say no to that?
You know, Susan, it seems so counterintuitive, but I think sometimes we do have to say no. You know, we can see what's happening to our kids, and our kids sometimes are so engulfed in it that they can't. And I don't think we say no to everything, but we might say, boy, you're doing 6 different things after school and you're not home till 9 o'clock. Let's say no to something. Let's pick 1 thing or 2 things that are superfluous, not your passions. Say no to those so we can regulate and balance our use of time and stress.
How are you seeing kids coping with chronic stress? What are they doing? Are they drinking alcohol? Are they using drugs? Are they tuning out? I mean, what's the problem that you see?
It evolves. So oftentimes in the early teenage years, you see them playing video games, playing with their friends, communicating on social media, and it feels like not what we would all choose as parents, but it feels okay. Then sometime in high school, you get that turn toward alcohol and drugs, and a lot of kids tell me that's the only way I can cope with this. Sometimes borrowing somebody's prescription drugs, Xanax, Adderall, Ritalin, which becomes really alarming because kids do not know how to use this stuff and it's not prescribed to them, and it's a crime. But mostly it's just bad for them, and it's not a very good way to regulate.
Yeah, and so I know that you see a lot of people in your practice about this. We put on Facebook that people could ask you questions. We're going to give you time during the show to take a look at them. So we put out on Facebook, what questions do you have specifically about kids and stress? Because parents want to motivate their kids, but you don't want to stress kids out. And I think it's a very fine line. So let us know what your questions are. Go to our Facebook page and tell us what questions you have about your children and stress. And Dr. Duffy will be back a little bit later to answer that question. And to find out more about The Available Parent, his fantastic book, more about his speaking engagements, more about his practice, like I said, you can go to drjohnduffy.com. The name of the book, again, is The Available Parent, and we asked Susan to stick around, too. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Susan. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Try to knock them down.
Perfect.
And you're good at throwing them right in there.
Good questions,
Right.
everybody. Welcome back to the Morning Blend. Super excited to have psychologist Dr. John Duffy here. Good questions that we got on Facebook. Obviously, this is a topic that concerns a lot of parents. Really quickly, how do you know when you should get professional help?
All right, there's a couple of indicators. If you see a dramatic change in your child's behavior, dramatic, suddenly they're hanging out with a different crowd, their grades have dropped precipitously and immediately. They're dressing completely different. Their mood is completely different and down. Anything that you see that's drastic and dramatic, it's worth seeking professional help. Even if you feel like, I'm not sure, we're right on the edge there of what Dr. Duffy's saying, my bias would be there is no downside to going and talking to a professional and letting your kid work these things through. I will say from experience, kids are great at working this stuff through. Really good at it.
That's hopeful.
Yes.
I'm glad to have you say that.
Yeah.
Okay, Amy has a 24, 19, 16, 15, and 5-year-old. The 4 oldest are girls. She talks about how difficult the world is. We also heard from someone who didn't want us to share her name, but said her daughter is a sophomore in high school, isn't doing well, very stressed with problems, including about a best friend who's kind of trying to turn other kids against her daughter. What can you do about that?
Okay, so the first thing you want to do is you want to hear your daughter out, because as parents we think we understand that whole social dynamic. We hear a couple words and then we roll our eyes and we're like, oh, I've been there, I know what that's like. We don't know what that's like, so let your daughter air it out. Our push is sometimes to solve the problem, and we think, you know, I can fix this for you. I know I have this with my friend, and but our kids don't necessarily need that. They don't need us to fix it. They need us to hear them out.
And you said that's a problem, right?
Yes.
Parents aren't listening sometimes.
Parents aren't listening. That is my biggest issue with parents. It keeps me in business for the worst way, you know?
Right.
Is if parents listened better to their kids without being defensive. And as a parent, in order to listen effectively, you need to be prepared to hear what you don't want to hear, and that you might be part of the problem. You know?
It's tough.
But if you can live with that, then and hear your kids out, then they'll talk to you.
2 really good questions that are sleep related. Sharon is talking about a 15-year-old sophomore. She's a leader, takes AP classes, handles it well, but she's stressed and needs to catch up, isn't getting enough sleep. And then in Jenny's case, her son is 11, has a lot on his mind. He thinks a lot and has trouble falling asleep, how to get kids to wind down.
Yes.
So specifically about sleep, it's like as parents, we know it's important, but technology, again, is a big enemy to sleep.
It really is. I mean, because in any room, a kid can have his phone out until 4 in the morning, and believe me, that happens, and it happens a lot. First off, you know, with your 11-year-old, I think he's 11.
Yeah.
You know, you want to make sure you understand what's going on with him. Something is keeping him awake. Typically, 11-year-old boys fall asleep like a rock when they hit the pillow. So there is a reason that this guy's not falling asleep. For the older girl, she is over-involved. She is overstressed, and parents are so reluctant about this. But if it were up to me, I would take a couple of those activities off up the top, you know, and ask her, what are the most important 3 things that you're doing? Not the most important 6 or 7. And let's get rid of some of them so that you can breathe a little bit. And I virtually guarantee you she'll sleep better at night without medication, without any other, you know, data coming into her body. She can make it through that night.
This is a really good question from Kristen about a niece who's been put in the middle of a very tumultuous relationship and divorce. This is a big problem when parents include and involve children in adult issues, especially as it relates to divorce. I bet you see a lot of that in your practice.
I do, and Molly, I can tell you kind of know what's going on here, that kids aren't equipped to handle all of that, right? And so they're stressed out. That might keep them up. That might make them symptomatic, anxious, depressed. So we need to be very aware as parents of what our kids are prepared to hear and to handle. If this child were 10 years older and mom's relationship with her were very adult, it might be a very different story, but this is a child.
Yeah, who's now having migraines and headaches and anxiety.
The message she's probably receiving is, my world's not really safe. And so she is kind of on hyper alert and very vigilant all the time about the surroundings around her. And that is not a healthy way for a kid to be. And I can imagine that eventually, if it hasn't happened already, her grades will start to slip as well, along with all these symptoms.
So the key really is to take them out of those kinds of conversations,
Yes,
right?
Absolutely, 100%. Recognize what conversations are healthy for kids to be involved in, but tell them what they need to know, but don't tell them everything. They don't need to know everything, and it's stressful for them to know everything.
Absolutely. It's a great topic. Thanks for taking the questions. We really appreciate it. You can find out more about Dr. Duffy and his book, The Available Parent, by visiting his website. It's drjohnduffy.com. Listening is key, right?
Listening is the main thing. If you walk away with nothing else, listen to your kids in as non-judgmental a way as you can conjure. That's the first thing. The other thing is you want to watch your kids and you want to pay attention to what it is that they're doing well. I suppose the final point is really you want to accentuate the positive. We talked a lot about what they do wrong, how to watch for trouble. I also want people to be very aware of watching for what is working well in your child's life and really go out of your way to support that.
Love it. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your time.